Shalom and welcome to Yeshiva B'nai Noach. I'm Tom Averna as we continue with the Beginning Biblical Hebrew course. In this class, we'll be taking a look at the direct object from Chapter 8 of First Hebrew Primer, 3rd edition, your textbook for the class, and we'll begin with an oral review. So this is the oral review from Chapter 8, page 59, and as always, I will read the Hebrew and give you an opportunity then to practice it on your own, then come back and listen, and then practice as much as you need to. So let's start now with line 1. Ani yeshavti. Yeshavti b'derech memoav el Mitzrayim. Line 2. Ata achalta. Achalta hayom lifnei hamelech. Number 3. At lekachat. Lekachat banim min ha'avot. Number 4. Hu amar. Hu amar lo zacharti na'ara merushalayim. Number 5. He shalcha. He lo shalcha lechem el habayit. Number 6. Anachnu avarnu. Avarnu min ha'ir el heharim. Number 7. Atem amadtem. Amadtem al haaretz. Number 8. Hema lachu. Hema lachu behemot min ha'avot velo amaru davar. Number 9. Amadta bahar. Amadta bahar visham zacharta isha. Number 10. Hu shamar behema vihu achal lechem. Shamarnu behema velechem achalnu. Number 11. Mimitzrayim Avra ulmoav halacha. Mimitzrayim Averu ulmoav halachu. So that's the oral review for Chapter 8, again, page 59 in your textbook. And I do not have the translation for the oral reviews up on Quizlet, just because I think the reviews are pretty basic, just reviewing previous chapter. So if you're having difficulty with the vocabulary on the oral review, I would suggest that you do not go any further, but that you go back and review your vocab until you can do the oral reviews easily without much difficulty. Now, if enough of you comment and say that you would like these oral reviews put up on Quizlet, I can certainly do that. But for right now, for the most part, they are not up there on Quizlet. All right, so that's again, that's the oral review. You should be able to get through these. They're pretty basic sentences, and it's just reviewing the vocab from your previous chapter. So please go back and study that a little bit more if you're having some difficulties with that. Let's go on now. So let's first of all take a look at the new vocabulary for chapter 8. We have asher, that, which, who, and where. So any of these, you're looking for context to see which of these works the best. Occasionally it's just trial and error, but asher could be any of these 4 translations. Bane, between or among. And later on in the chapter, we'll look at the difference between when you would use between and when you would use among. Very much the same as you would in English, same idea behind the 2 different translations for bane. Haya is the to be verb. It's be, to or was in the past tense. So haya, hey, yud, hey, is the verb of being. Ma, me, what or how. What ma. One of the ways to remember it is the who, me, which I don't think we've had yet, but me means who, and what is ma. So who, me, what ma, but what ma. Ma is what or how, and it can be any of these spellings. You see a note down here for that. Spelling rules for ma are in your notes, page 396. No difference in meaning, as generally is the case with the different vowels underneath, but all meaning what or how. Masculine noun, plural, mayim. This is one of those collective nouns. Mayim it tends to take the plural verb, but it's often translated in the singular. So you might have the verb that looks like you would say there were water, but you obviously wouldn't translate it as that. You would say there was water, even though you might have the hayu, the plural form of the to be verb in there, or a plural form of another verb. Or if in context there are many waters that are being talked about, then you just have to look at the context for that. But mayim, water, masculine noun, plural. Milchama, milchamot, singular, plural, war or battle, and it is feminine. Note what word is in this. So the literal translation is from lechem, or lecham, as it would be here, but it's from the word lechem, which is bread. So what are most battles fought over? They're fought over a need for more things, more food, more bread. But milchama, milchamot, war and battle, feminine. Mishpat, mishpatim, masculine noun, meaning judgment, law, or justice. Mishpat, mishpatim. Ad, until, as far as. Ad, until, as far as. Sometimes I will give you things that might help you remember, but it occurs to me, or at least I want to make this mention now. For those of you that have ideas or ways that you remember words, it would be really cool if you would post those in the comment section to help your fellow students. So again, any ways from any of these vocab words, you can go back to past classes. And I hadn't mentioned this before, but I just think it would be really neat if you would help your students if you have ideas for ways to memorize these words. But odd, until, as far as, the way I, and sometimes if you do humorous, it helps, or whatever it is, or shocking, different ways to memorize. This one I remember memorizing by thinking to myself, I will be odd until, as far as I can remember, and as long as I can live, I will be odd. All right, so until, as far as, odd. Im is with, im is with. Asa, do or make, or in the past tense, did or made. Asa. Kol, masculine noun, meaning voice or sound. Kol nidre, sounds in the night. Verb ra'a, to see. Ra'a, or saw in the past tense. Ra'a. Masculine nouns sha'ar and sha'arim, meaning gate. And another masculine noun, sadeh and sadot, meaning field. So those are our vocab words. Page 60 in your textbook, chapter 8. This isn't from your textbook, so if you do need to stop the video to write these, copy these down, you're certainly welcome to do that. But these are just some of the basic information, an overview of the direct object and definite nouns. A look at what makes either one of those things. Some of this is pretty standard English information, grammar. But a direct object is the thing or person receiving the action of the verb. So in English, the direct object is always going to follow the verb. Generally speaking, that's going to be true of Hebrew as well. But there are some rules that we'll get to when we get to definite nouns. The direct object never, the verbs, the to be verbs, is, are, am, was, were, etc., never take a direct object. Never take a direct object. Doesn't mean there isn't going to be a word there that looks like a direct object, because there will be. He was a king. It's just referring back to who he, essentially giving more information about the subject itself. It's not receiving any action because the to be verbs do not have any action within them. So it has to receive action in order to be the true direct object. Generally, the direct object answers the question, what or whom? What or whom? Ma or me? Direct objects can be nouns and or noun phrases. So it doesn't have to be a one word, it can be several words, can be a combination of both. So that's all the direct object. That's what we're primarily going to be talking about here. But it's important to also identify the direct or the definite nouns, and we'll see why as we get to the information about et. But a definite noun is a proper name of a person, place, or thing. Okay? In English, that's what a definite noun would be. Or it would be a particular thing or person if it wasn't a proper name. In Hebrew, any noun preceded by the hey, which is the, that makes it definite. When a direct object, usually preceded by the Hebrew, when a direct object is a definite noun, it should say here, it's usually preceded by the Hebrew word et. Et has no meaning in this role, it's only a marker for the definite direct object. So again, the et is a marker. This will tell you in Hebrew, okay, what follows this is definitely a direct object. But you would only use this in the case of a definite noun, not an indefinite noun. If the king threw a ball would not be a definite noun. So therefore, et would not precede that phrase. It wouldn't be the king et a ball, because a ball is not definite. If it was the king threw the ball, then it would be the king et the ball. And we'll have examples of this. But so these are the primary rules regarding direct object and definite and indefinite nouns. Only the definite nouns are going to take a direct object marker. Okay. So now let's get back to your book on page 60. Direct object, very simple Hebrew sentences can be made using only a noun and a verb. Actually, it can be used, simple sentences can only require a verb. Zachar, he remembered. But in this case, it's Hamelech Zachar, the king remembered. So simple sentences can also be made, I guess that's what I just said, only using a verb form. Shamarti, I guarded. Amadta rather, you stood. So you can get more complex then with sentences by adding an object indicating whom the king remembered and what I guarded. Hamelech Zachar bane, the king remembered a son. Shamarti derech, I guarded a road. So bane and derech are both direct objects because they're receiving the action of the verb. The road is being guarded. The son is being remembered. They are receiving the action of the verb. Again, the direct object generally answers the questions what or whom. What is being guarded? Who is being remembered? On page 61, reinforcing the information that we got earlier, the difference between definite and indefinite nouns. Okay, so a definite noun has the hey in front of it, or it's a proper name. Either one of these two situations means that the noun is definite. Again, pretty obvious. It's not just a man, it's the man. Right? So that's definite. Whereas indefinite would be a man, a city, a daughter. Pretty straightforward. But it's important to recognize that this this hey in front of, attached to a noun, is pretty important. It makes a difference. However, as we've learned before, proper nouns don't require the hey in front of them. They're already definite. They don't need the hey to make them definite. So you would never put a hey in front of a proper noun. And a pretty obvious section here, but just to remind you, direct object of a sentence can be either definite or indefinite. It doesn't matter as far as whether or not it's the object of a sentence. If it's receiving the action of the verb, it doesn't matter whether it's a definite, whether it's the son or a son. It's still the direct object. It only matters in terms of other grammatical reasons, features. So again, direct object, any noun, definite or indefinite, that receives the action of the verb. So in Hebrew, this is where it does matter whether the direct object is definite or indefinite, because it is generally preceded by the word et, aleph tav. Okay, only the definite noun would be preceded by the word et. Et has no translation. It's simply used to mark direct objects when they're definite. There are many rabbinic teachings regarding the word et, and its very, very important feature as far as what it might mean outside of being a direct object marker, but that, of course, is for another class. But for this class, just recognize that et has no translation. It's just simply a direct object marker. It's sometimes spelled differently, but generally speaking, you'll see it this way. Okay? And when it's not a definite, you don't require, it doesn't use the et, isn't included. So the note 17 here, which I've included, you'll find this in the back of your book. But the note says in biblical text, when eight is used with the tsere and spelled with the tsere, it stands alone as a word. When et is spelled with the sagol, it's attached to the next word with a makef. But you won't see that in this book because the primer doesn't use the makef. So that you might not recognize, or you might ask the question if you see it in other texts, why is there a straight line up here, which is called the makef? That is why. It's part of the grammatical structure when the aleph tav is written with the tsere. Or I'm sorry, when it's written with the sagol. The tsere, it doesn't have the makef. With the sagol, it does. Again, this is in the back of your book, note 17. And some examples on page 61. So, Hamelech zachar bane, or Hamelech zachar et ha bane, or Shalachta lechem l'Rushalayim, Shalachta et halechem l'Rushalayim. Hu shamar et Yerushalayim, Hem zacharu et Abraham. So again, you see that the direct object marker is used because these are proper names. And the direct object marker is used here because you have a definite noun. Here you have a definite noun. So it requires the direct object marker. So this is a son, this is the son. This is bread, any old bread. This is the bread, etc. It gets a little trickier if your sentence has more than one direct object, but the et will precede each one. The et wouldn't be translated, but the vav in front of it, which translates as and, would be translated. So in this case, we have Avraham shalach et ha'ish, ve'et ha'isha, ve'et ha'na'ar la'ir. Abraham sent the man and the woman and the young man to the You've got that kamatz under it, to the city. So again, Hebrew sentences can appear in any word order. It's important to recognize that the et can identify for you the direct object. So if for some reason the direct object would come between the subject and verb, again, I just don't think it happens that often, or before the subject, and it's preceded by et, doesn't matter what word order, if it's preceded by et, it is the direct object. So don't get confused about that. So this on page 62 just shows you some examples of that. Here's the normal word order, ha'av, shamar, et, hana'ar. But your sentence could also read et, hana'ar, shamar, ha'av. So you see that you found the verb. So here's the verb, shamar, and you kind of want to make the young man guarding something, but then you notice the et is in front of it, so that cannot be the subject. Therefore, you have to turn to the only other noun that is here, and that is the father. So ha'av, shamar, the father guarded the young man. The same with this sentence. So here on page 62, it talks about the fact that in the verbs introduced in this chapter all end in hey. And that's going to change slightly the conjugation. And on the next slide, we'll take a look at that. But just note that even though the conjugation changes, you're still going to see basically the same endings. We'll look at that in a minute. But the reason that they change is because when you have gutturals, any of the 5 guttural letters as part of the verb root, that tends to change, almost always changes, the vowels and the structure of the conjugation of it. All right, so you'll begin to recognize that. So in the next slide, we'll take a look at the comparison between shamar, to guard, haya, to be, and you'll want to memorize the perfect tense forms of haya. Now, haya, again, the to be verb, this is going to be in the past tense. For the most part, the present tense of the to be verbs are understood. They won't be included. And just to point out why, or one reason why, is because of the possible confusion with this verb, and even in the past tense that confusion might exist, but the possible confusion of this verb with the name of God, the tetragrammaton, because you'll notice the yod and the hey play very prominently in this verb, as it does in the tetragrammaton, 4-letter name of God. So one of the reasons that the to be verb is always understood in Hebrew is just to help avoid any possible confusion with seeing this verb and thinking that it is the name of Hashem. So here we have the comparisons, and I ask you not to get too hung up on it. Just notice the difference. So you still have the same endings here, and that's what I want you to see. T, ta, t, T, ta, t, and there's no Shiva under here, but still it's going to be a T. You're going to end with the sound of the T. So T, ta, t, t, okay? But that ending is the same. The root is still the 3-letter root. That means he did something. And the hey is added to mean she did something. And then nu, tem, ten, we, you, and oo, and the ending. So your endings are still going to be pretty easy to recognize. The difference is 2 differences. One is you add, you take the first 2 letters of the root, and then you add E to it. And then the hey drops out with one exception or a few exceptions here. The hay becomes a tav in this case. Okay, but again, looking at the endings, if you just focus on that, it'll be slightly less confusing. And recognize that you're only using 2 letters of the root if your verb ends in the hay ending, because that hay drops out and it's replaced by either an e or a tav. But practice it, practice, practice, practice. So shamarti, shamarta, shamart, shamar, shamara, shamarnu, shamartem, shamarten, shamaru, hayiti, hayita, hayit, haya, hayta, hayinu, hayitem, hayiten, hayu, hayu. So you only have, again, your 2 letters are all that you use in the hay verbs. Okay? So practice, practice, practice. Page 63, reminding you of something they already told you. The to be verb does not take the et. So just be aware of that. The to be verb, which is not an action verb, it's a verb of being, does not take the et. So now on page 63, we have 2 idioms, 2 more idioms that you'll need to pick up, and these are included in the vocab list on Quizlet as you practice it. So the regular vocab words and these idioms are on the vocab list. So in this case, we have the direct object marker, et, followed by the word asher. Now, when you have that combination, then the et does affect, in a way, the word that follows it. So in this case, et asher means that which or what. Okay, so asher by itself means that which or what, but you're putting it together here. That which or what would be the translation. I remembered what I did, or I remembered that which I did. Either one of those would work in the translation. Zacharti et asher asiti. And you can use either one. And then the other one is ad asher, ad asher. And essentially here, you're ignoring the asher. The idiom simply means until, which is what ad means. Until as far as, but so until where I saw the man. At any rate, I'm not quite sure why, but this is just memorize it as an idiom, ad asher. When you see the 2 words together, it simply means until. I walked until I saw. So halachti ad asher. Okay, I walked ad asher until ra'iti, I saw ha'ish, the man. So this is another possible use of or translation of some forms of the to be verb, but just in basic, the to be verb is translated just as it would be in English, past tense. So ha'ish haya al hahar, the man was on the mountain. Okay, but occasionally these forms, the third person forms of haya, haita, and hayu, which you might translate as he was, or she was, or they were, could also be translated as there was. Either of these 2 can be there was, and the plural could be there were. There were. So, Hayayish Bayir, a man was in the city, or you could also translate it as there was a man in the city. So, and again, the word order could be this way. I mean, when the verb is in front of the noun, the subject, it makes it easier to recognize that maybe I want to translate it as there was. But the verb could just as easily be here, and it still might be better to translate it as there was. What is the difference? Well, you have to look at context, and there isn't a whole lot of difference. But so there were people in the city, or people were in the city. It can be translated either way. And finally, the word lo is added to make a sentence negative. So ish lo haya ba'ir, a man was not in the city, or there was not a man in the city. Okay? A little confusing here. You just deal with it in terms of translation, context, what sounds the best, but just know that any of these forms of the to be verb could be there was or there were, depending on whether it's singular or plural. And then finally, I mentioned this when we looked at the vocab. The word bane can mean between or among. So, and just as in English, it's pretty obvious. If there's a group of people, a group of things that you are among, or if there are two things or two groups of things that you're between, that's the difference of how you would translate it. So if you only have one object, Hamelech halach bane ha nashim, the king went among the women. You wouldn't say between the women because, I mean, you could, but generally speaking, when we just have one object, you're going to translate this as among. But if you had two objects, Hamelech halach bane ha nashim uvein habanim, the king went between the women and the children. And notice you don't have to translate between twice. Even though it's there, if you're translating it into English, it would be less awkward not to repeat it. Okay? Same thing here. You have two objects, so that therefore you're going to use the word between rather than among, which only refers to one object. Okay? Now, but again, you could have a sentence that said, the king went between the women. I mean, that could be the context of it. But generally speaking, if there's one object, you'll translate this as among rather than between. Okay? And the last comment that your book makes is in terms of translation that, and essentially, be careful when you're translating. You're not going to necessarily translate word for word. It's very nice when you can, and sometimes you can in Hebrew. But generally speaking, the word order is not the same in Hebrew as it is in English. So what might sound or what might seem good in Hebrew wouldn't be translated that way. You'd have to translate it so that it makes more sense in Hebrew. So the man stood between the mountains and between the city. Instead, you say the man stood between the mountains and the city. You don't repeat between, which we talked about. Same with any part of the word order. So just be aware that, and this is the problem with translations, is it really is up to the translator to decide how he or she wants to translate it, how he or she thinks it's best translated. May not be the true intention of the Hebrew phrase. And that's the problem with translations. But be aware as you're translating, you want it to make sense in English. That's the language you're translating it to. All right? That's all of that. Let's look at Chapter 8, the direct object review. We'll, next class, start on the exercises for Chapter 8. And as I mentioned, I believe we may do Chapter 8 in 3 sections. I'm not sure yet, but we'll see. But be aware that that's a possibility. But at any rate, we'll definitely be starting with Chapter 9, doing it in three segments, and maybe eventually in 4 segments for the exercises. You'll have 2 2 or possibly 3 segments for the exercises. So that's coming up. Be looking for the exercises next. As I've mentioned before, please do not continue if you are finding yourself bogged down. Don't try and do too much. Take your time. There's no rush. The beauty of doing this in this format is that it doesn't matter when you start the next chapter or the next video. Take all the time you need, but get your foundations secure. And your foundation is your vocabulary. Vocabulary, vocabulary, vocabulary. That's so important. You've got to have that vocabulary down. You've got to be able to do those oral reviews without any trouble, because then we're adding more and more. But if you have your initial foundation of the vocabulary and everything that you've learned to date down, then there's just a little bit more to add to it, and a little bit more and a little bit more. It'll become easier and easier as you go. But practice that vocabulary. Do not continue until your vocabulary is solid for all of the chapters to date. Once you do that, then continue on. There's no rush. There's no rush. All right, so enjoy. Thanks for sharing this class with me. For Yeshiva B'nai Noach, I'm Tom Averna. Shalom.